Today we're tackling an urgent and vital topic that affects all of us. Why does the Federal Reserve target a 2% inflation rate, and how can you safeguard and even enhance your standard of living in an inflationary environment? In this video, we'll break down the reasoning behind this policy, what to expect, and what you can do when it comes to the affordability of things. But first, let's go back a few years to understand the context. Before the pandemic, inflation was hovering just above 2%. But then COVID-19 struck in 2020, and I know it seems so long ago at this point, and it's easy to forget, but remember, the US went into a nationwide lockdown, and so did many other countries around the world. This situation caused one of the sharpest economic downturns in recent history and also globally. As governments implemented restrictions to curb the virus spread, many businesses had to shut their doors and economic activity plummeted. Of course, naturally. In the US, unemployment soared to 14.7% in April of 2020, which marks the highest level since the Great Depression. So then what did the US government do? To prevent the economy from completely stalling, the US and other countries rolled out massive stimulus packages. In the US, this included direct payments in the form of stimulus checks, prolonged unemployment benefits, and loans for small businesses. Central banks, including the Federal Reserve, slashed interest rates to near zero and implemented measures like quantitative easing to increase the money supply. These strategies were implemented to promote spending and borrowing, one of the key drivers of economic growth. The US was in unprecedented times. This wave of stimulus had significant consequences. It led to inflation worldwide, as seen in this chart here. The US is represented by the orange line, and as you can tell, closely mirrors the global inflation trends, with countries like Italy represented by the brown gold line, experiencing nearly 12% inflation. Germany and the UK followed suit later in the pandemic with increasingly higher inflation numbers. But then what exactly is inflation? It's the rate at which prices for goods and services rise, which effectively reduces the purchasing power of your money. Picture it as too much money chasing too few goods. That's one of the simplest ways to understand what happened in the US with prices. When demand for a product surges, but supply remains the same or decreases, prices unavoidably must rise. A prime example is the real estate market here in the US. We had way too much demand, not enough supply, and then what happened, especially during the COVID years? Prices skyrocketed. And as of 2024, when we look at the US housing prices, the median price is now close to $500,000. It's really unreal. Buyers were pushing up the prices partially due to multiple offer situations, and sellers naturally taking advantage of the demand. If you can sell your home for more, why wouldn't you? That's how a lot of sellers thought about it. This pushed the median price in the US, like I said, up very fast. In essence, the inflation spike in the US was driven by several factors. We saw robust consumer demand, significant supply chain disruptions, rising energy costs, and the fiscal stimulus measures I mentioned earlier, including quantitative easing. Now, let's pivot and talk about how inflation is measured in the US. CPI, which stands for Consumer Price Index, is the primary tool used. The CPI tracks the prices of major categories of goods and services that households typically purchase, which can include essentials like food, energy, shelter, medical care, and transportation. It's no surprise then that housing represents one of the largest expenses for households, giving it significant weight in the CPI calculation. CPI housing inflation primarily consists of two components: rent for primary residences and owner's equivalent rent, together accounting for estimated 95% of the overall shelter inflation measure. For a clearer overview, here's a simplified Pew Research chart. While this chart is from 2021 and the proportions may vary slightly in 2024, the reality is that shelter and food still account for the largest shares of household expenses. And I think this is just a nice visualization of how these costs break down. These essentials significantly impact the overall inflation rate because they're not easy to cut back on because they're impacting our daily lives. When prices for these components rise, then everyone feels the effects differently. So for instance, higher gas prices can make commuting more expensive if you're somebody that drives a lot, while increasing rent or food prices can strain the budget and make it much harder to get by, especially if you're someone that is renting a home. But why does the Federal Reserve specifically target a 2% inflation rate? Why not aim for 0, 5%, or some other number? Well, let's talk about it. The 2% target isn't just an arbitrary figure. Many economists believe it promotes a healthy economy. Essentially, it's considered the sweet spot for inflation by many. And here's the thinking. When people anticipate gradual price increases, so consumers like me, like you, they're more likely to spend or invest sooner rather than later. So for example, if you expect a car to cost 2% more next year, you might actually decide to buy it now instead of waiting. This behavior stimulates economic activity, boosting demand for goods and services, creating jobs, and supporting business growth. Now conversely, if prices were expected to fall, you would probably wait to make those purchases until you felt that the prices is at its lowest. Also, moderate inflation can actually help make debt more manageable. So take the national debt, for example. It currently stands at over a staggering $35 trillion. As inflation occurs, wages and the gross domestic product, the GDP, typically rise alongside. This means that over time, even if your loan payment remains constant for you, the consumer, your salary and the economy's overall output may increase, making it easier to handle the debt. And that's another reason why you will not see the Fed striving for deflation. We're going to explore a simplified example to illustrate how this works. So imagine you have a $2,000 monthly mortgage payment and a monthly income of $8,000 after taxes. In this scenario, your mortgage payment accounts for 25% of your income. Now, let's fast forward 5 years. Thanks to inflation and working for a good company, you receive raises to keep up with the rising costs with inflation, and your monthly take-home income increases to $10,000 after taxes. However, your mortgage payment remains at $2,000, and now your mortgage represents only 20% of your income. This illustrates how inflation can reduce the relative burden of debt over time, because in the perfect world, the GDP will increase and your income will increase as well. And so as I mentioned, this principle applies to countries and their debt levels. While wage growth doesn't always keep pace with inflation, at a 2% rate, there is a reasonable expectation that wages will at least align with the cost of living. This alignment allows for gradual improvements in the purchasing power. When the job market is strong, employers frequently offer raises to retain talent, which is the most effective way to address inflation through wage growth. Well, now you might wonder, why not just aim for zero inflation? When prices are expected to fall, known as deflation, people tend to delay purchases. And why buy a car today if you know it will be cheaper next month, right? We spoke about it earlier. And so this behavior can hinder economic growth. Businesses then will experience reduced revenue, and it's very likely that they will have to cut jobs or provide lower wages. And this is exactly what China is currently dealing with. They're grappling with a possible deflation era where prices are decreasing in major product categories. And the situation is tied to rising unemployment, particularly among young people, due to weak consumer spending, a struggling real estate sector, the real estate prices are just crashing there, and a slowdown in economic growth. In China, these challenges are raising significant concerns about the overall health of the economy, and China is now planning to offer stimulus packages to accelerate the economy. In contrast, the The US 2% target helps mitigate this risk by ensuring prices rise at a predictable, moderate pace. If inflation consistently exceeds 2%, the purchasing power of money declines faster than wage growth, making everyday essentials harder to afford. This can also lead to what's known as wage price spirals, where rising prices prompt demand for higher wages, which in turn drive prices even higher. And that's a cycle that the US doesn't want to get into. On the flip side, inflation below the 2% target or outright deflation can harm the economy by discouraging spending and investment. If businesses expect lower prices in the future, they may hold off on expanding or hiring, leading to stagnant or declining economic activity. So having explained this, the assumption is that when it comes to inflation, unless there is another COVID situation or perhaps a war that breaks out, we can assume that inflation is going to be somewhere around 2% fairly soon here in the US in the future. And so what practical steps can you take to maintain or even improve your standard of living during inflationary times? Sure, there are going to be some specific product categories where prices might decrease due to a decrease in demand or perhaps an increase in supply. But in general, prices are not going to come down. So then while the pace of price growth may slow, many major product categories, even real estate, are still projected to rise, albeit at a slower rate. So then with that in mind, be proactive, budget and track your expenses, adjust your spending habits, seek opportunities to increase your income, and don't hesitate to ask for a raise to keep up with or even surpass inflation, depending on your situation. And if you don't ask for a raise, it's not automatically that you're going to get a raise. So you have to ask, you gotta have a reason for it. Inflation, of course, being one of them. And if you've done an excellent job, you would want to ask for compensation as well. Now, you can also explore additional income streams. I actually feel that in today's world, with all these digital avenues, it is so much easier to make money utilizing digital platforms. And they offer really viable opportunities. For example, you can start a YouTube channel, or perhaps you can sell products via Amazon or Etsy. Real estate is the biggest asset class in the world for a reason. For one, investors are continuing to secure revenue streams, right, via rental opportunities, while possibly also taking advantage of appreciation later. And that's definitely an opportunity for you to consider a real estate property for investment purposes. You can also shop smarter and stay informed about price trends and market innovations and shifts. I was recently able to lower my monthly bill by over $100 a month because I went from a Comcast package deal to YouTube TV. Look for opportunities to save money. Don't overlook your most valuable asset, which is actually you. Nurture it. Learn new skills, take courses, and get training certificates. Put them on LinkedIn. Show employers that you're willing to learn more, you're willing to expand your skill set. And that in many cases will also warrant a higher price tag, right? That will warrant higher compensation. It's an excellent way to improve your grasp of your field and broaden your expertise. Now, switching to a higher paying career can also help your income keep pace with inflation. That's what a lot of people are doing. Corporate America, for example, where it seems like it's a rotating door. If you're an employer, you might actually want to give higher level of compensations if you don't want to lose your best employees because they have options. Lastly, if you have debt, particularly high interest debt, strive to pay it down or refinance it if it makes sense. While inflation can make fixed rate debts more manageable over time, variable debts can rise if inflation increases. So aim to pay off high interest loans as quickly as possible. I think the best thing you can do is speak to a good financial advisor, and I really feel that it's a worthwhile investment that's going to pay off in the mid to long run. Share your thoughts in the comments. What are you going to do to keep up with inflation? If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel for more insights on real estate, the economy, and so much more. Thanks so much for watching today, guys. I always appreciate it when you do. Have a great day. and take care.